In the hard winter of 1968, Iris Merrow was 61 years old, and she was left with $187 and a dead rail depot. She thought, that winter, that she had known the man who had married into her family, her husband's brother Emmett, closed and quiet and strange as he was. She was wrong. She had not known him at all, and it would take a forgotten iron safe behind a boarded ticket window and a whole hard spring of reading what he had written in the dark before she understood the size of the thing she had been wrong about. It began with a door closing that she had walked through every working morning for 29 years. Iris had run the depot at Cedar Halt since she was 32. Back when the Kettleback Northern still ran 3 trains a day up the grade and the town lived by the rails, and she had worked the telegraph key and sold the tickets and signed the way bills and swept the waiting room, her whole working life bound to the sound of the wire and the whistle. She had married a Merrow, a track foreman named Harold, and buried him 9 years back when the winter took his lungs, and after that the depot was all the marriage she had left, and she had believed, the way a person believes the floor will hold, that it would keep her until she was old and set her down gently at the end. The division man's name was Harlan Prentice, and he had come up from the city with a briefcase and a good overcoat and a way of talking that never quite landed on a person's face, and he did the thing the road had decided to do anyway, on a Tuesday, in the depot office with the stove ticking between them. Iris would remember afterward that he had a paper ready before she poured the coffee, which is how you know a thing has already been decided. "Mrs. Merrow," he said, "I want you to know the company thinks the world of you. 29 years on this key. Nobody's forgetting that." He turned the paper a quarter turn toward her, the way a man does when he wants you to sign a thing without quite handing it to you. "But the branch doesn't pay anymore. We're abandoning the Cedar Halt line, effective the end of the month. The rails come up in the spring. And that means, I'm sorry to say it, that we won't be needing an agent here past the 1st. There's a severance to see you settled. The company wanted to do right by you. There's still freight moving on this branch," Iris said. Her voice sounded strange to her, very level, very far away. "I signed for a car of feed not 3 weeks ago. Mr. Prentice, I worked this station through 2 washouts and the winter of 49. What do you mean, abandon it? Where's the town supposed to ship from? Where am I supposed to go?" "I know," Prentice said, and he had the grace to look at the stove instead of at her. "I know it's hard. 29 years. He slid the envelope across. "It's a fair figure, Mrs. Merrow, more than the road strictly owes. We wanted to see you comfortable while you settle somewhere down the valley." Iris opened the envelope and did the arithmetic in a single breath. It was not fair. It was the smallest lawful thing, dressed as a kindness, and after the last of what she owed on her rented rooms and the doctor's bill from Harold's long dying. It would leave her with something close to $200 and no work and no place. She did not say any of that. She had learned long ago there was no use saying arithmetic to a man who had already spent it. "You had this drawn up before you climbed the grade," she said instead. Prentice did not answer that, which was its own answer. "I'll close out the books," Iris said, and she stood, and did not shake his hand, and went out onto the platform where the wind came down off the ridge and the long rails ran empty north and south, and looked at the little station she had kept for 29 years, and understood that at 61, for the first time in her adult life, she was a woman with nothing to do the next morning. She had $187 when the last of it was counted. She sat that evening in her rented rooms above the mercantile with the money in an envelope on the table and tried to make the arithmetic come out to something that was not fear. And it would not. 61 years old, a widow, no children, no work, and a landlord who would want the next month by the 10th. She did not weep. She sat very still and let the size of it settle on her, and thought that a person could give 29 years of honest, unthanked work to a thing and be walked out of it in an afternoon and find the world had already decided to pull up the rails behind her. And then, 6 days later, her husband's brother Emmett died, and the smallness of her life got smaller, and though she did not yet know it, turned entirely around. Emmett Merrow had been the station agent at Cedar Halt before Iris ever came, and then down the years, when the road cut the branch to one train and then to freight only, it was Emmett who kept the freight house and the spur while Iris worked the passenger side, the two of them the last of the road at Cedar Halt. Working 100 feet apart for 20 years while he never once said a word to her that was not the business of the railroad. He was her husband's older brother, and he had stood silent at Harold's grave and silent at every Christmas she ever asked him to. A gaunt, shut, solitary man who lived alone in the agent's rooms after the road stopped paying him, growing stranger and quieter. Coming into town for coal and lamp oil and little else, a man the people of Cedar Halt regarded the way they regarded the dark depot at the end of the spur, with a vague unease and no curiosity at all. He left no will that anyone could find. He left, the county clerk told Iris when she came in about the burial, exactly one thing that stood in his name, the Cedar Halt Depot and the ground it sat on, and it was not so much left to her as left around her neck, because it came with a lien. Back taxes, the clerk said. He was a decent young man named Sowerby, and he did not enjoy his work that morning any more than Prentice had enjoyed his. The depot's been carried delinquent a good while, Mrs. Merrow. The county condemned the structure 2 years back, the platform's caved, the roof's going, it's a hazard, and there's a demolition notice filed against it. You're the nearest thing to kin he had, so the parcel falls to you if you want it, but subject to the lien. The back taxes come to $187. Iris almost laughed, and the laugh, if it had come out, would have frightened her, so she held it. $187, near enough the exact figure Harlan Prentice had walked her out the door with. As if the world had counted out precisely what it would cost to leave her with nothing at all, and handed her a ruined depot to spend it on. "And if I don't want it?" she asked. "Then it's forfeit to the county for the taxes, and the county pulls it down." Sowerby hesitated. "There's already a party interested, I'll be honest. The Halloran Aggregate Company's been asking after that parcel and the spur ground that runs with it. They'd likely settle the lien and take it off the county's hands, and you'd walk away clear. Some would say that's the sensible course. It's a heap of trouble, that depot, and no use to a soul." Iris sat in the county office and thought about the sensible course. She thought about Emmett Merrow, who had never in 20 years said a kind word to her, and had stood at Harold's grave with his jaw working and said nothing at all. She did not owe him tenderness, he had given her none. But he was Harold's blood, the last of the Merrows, and the depot was the last thing her husband's people had ever held, and she could not stand in a county office and let it be pulled down for scrap while a gravel company settled his debts and called it a mercy. "I'll pay the taxes," Iris said. Sowerby blinked. "Mrs. Merrow, that's every cent of $187. For a condemned depot you can't live in and can't sell for what you'd put in it." "I'm not sure you understand. I understand arithmetic better than most in this county, Mr. Sowerby," Iris said, not unkindly, "and I've decided. Draw the papers. I'll pay it today." And so, in the space of 6 days, Iris Merrow went from a woman with $187 and no property to a woman with no money at all and one dead rail depot, condemned, taxed, and slated for demolition. And the whole of Cedar Halt agreed on one thing, which was that grief and shock had knocked the sense clean out of poor Iris Merrow. The town was kind about it, in the way towns are kind, which is to say it had opinions. The women who had waited with her on the platform for the mail train brought what they could, and told her, gently and unanimously, that she must not throw good sense after bad, that the depot was a ruin and a danger, and the aggregate company would still buy it so she could walk away with something in her pocket instead of nothing. And within a week, the parties with a reason to want that spur ground began to come around, one by one, wearing their concern for her like a good coat. The land agent came first. His name was Calloway. He acted for the Halloran Aggregate Company, and he was smooth and sorry and very quick with a figure. He sat in Iris's rented rooms and told her how very sorry he was for her losses, both so close together, and then he came to it. "Now, Mrs. Merrow, I won't insult you by pretending this is a social call," Calloway said, smiling. "The company I represent has an interest in that parcel, the spur ground, mainly the right-of-way. The depot itself is worthless to us. We'd as soon it came down. But we're prepared to make you a fair offer for the whole parcel, taxes settled. Deed clear, cash in hand. It would put right this dreadful season you've had. $900. $900. Nearly 5 times what Iris had left for a ruin she had owned a week. She felt the pull of it, the sensible warm pull, the way you feel the pull of sleep. It was a floor under a woman with no floor at all. "That's a great deal of money," Iris said slowly. "For a worthless depot you mean to pull down." "It's for the parcel," Calloway said, a shade too smoothly. "The company likes to hold ground along the old rail lines. A rail bed is a fine thing to build a road on." He smiled again. "Take the offer, Mrs. Merrow. There's nothing up there but heartache and a roof that'll fall on you. Let us take it off your hands, and go be comfortable." And there it was, the thing that stopped her, though she could not yet have said why. It was not what he offered. It was the smoothness of the words a road, the way he laid them down and picked them back up too fast, the way a man does when he has said one true word too many in a sentence full of soft ones. Iris had read the honest and dishonest paperwork of the Kettleback Northern for 29 years, and she knew the difference between a man who wants a ruin gone and a man who wants it gone in a great hurry, and Calloway, for all his sorrow, was a man in a hurry. "I'll think about it," she said. "Don't think too long," Calloway said, rising, still pleasant. "The county's demolition order won't wait on your feelings, Mrs. Merrow, and neither, I'm afraid, will my company's interest." When he had gone, Iris sat a long while. Then her cousin came. Her cousin was Roy Tolliver, a heavy, hearty, loud man who ran a gravel hauling business at the edge of town and had never had a thought he did not share at the top of his voice. He came with a bottle and a great deal of sympathy, and mourned Emmett noisily, though he had not spoken to the old man in years, and then he came to his point. "Iris, honey, I'm going to talk to you like family, because somebody's got to," Roy said, leaning his big forearms on her table. "That depot is a stone around your neck, and you got no business up there alone at your age. Now, I hear the Halloran people made you an offer. 900? That's real money, Iris. You take it, and you let me handle the paperwork so those company sharks don't skin you, and we'll get you set up in a nice little place down the valley. I'll bring a truck for the moving, no charge." "That's generous of you, Roy," she said. "It's nothing. It's blood." He waved a hand. Old Emmett, God rest him, he was a queer duck, Iris. You know it as well as I do. Sat back of that boarded-up window years after the road quit paying him, like a spider in a hole. Whatever he was doing all that time, it wasn't sense. Sign the thing. Take the 900. Don't be sentimental about a dead man's pile of stone. And there it was again, the little quick way he said whatever he was doing all that time, as if the ruin at the end of the spur held something worth signing away in a hurry. What slipped out under Roy's noise was that her cousin was very eager to be handling her paperwork before she had read a single sheet of Emmett's herself. "I'll think about it," she said for the second time in a week. Roy's big face did something, a flicker, quickly covered with a grin. "Don't think too long, cuz," he said, and it was near enough word for word what the agent had said, and it did not sound any better in her cousin's mouth. That kind of offer's got legs. It'll walk. When he had gone, Iris sat in the dark a long time. Then she found the ring of keys the county clerk had given her, Emmett's keys, worn smooth with handling, and turned it under the lamp until she found the one that gave her pause, a great old flat-bitted iron key, long as her hand, its shank worn bright, oiled and clean when every other key was dull with disuse. She had no idea what it opened. But somebody had kept that one key working while all the others rusted. And Iris, who trusted arithmetic and mistrusted hurry, decided she would go and see her depot before she signed a word away to anyone. She drove out to the Cedar Halt Depot the next morning in Emmett's old truck, along the frozen valley road with the abandoned rails running rusty and bright on her left through a winter harder than any she could remember. The depot stood at the end of the spur where the track curved in against the ridge. Taller than she remembered and far more ruined, a great gray stone and timber building leaning under its own broad eaves, its long platform heaved by the frosts, its freight house doors sagging off their rollers, its windows boarded, its shingle roof stove in along one whole slope. A county notice was nailed to the sagging office door. Condemned, no entry. Unsafe structure. Iris took the notice down. She put the long iron key in the office door lock, and it turned, stiff but sure, freshly oiled, as if it had been used within the week, and she understood that Emmett had been coming and going through this door long after the town believed he had shut the depot for good. She pushed the heavy door open on its complaint of hinges and stepped inside, into the dim and the dust and the deep cold smell of stone and old creosote and cold iron. It was not the ruin the outside had promised. Someone had kept it. Not the roof, not the platform. Those were beyond one old man's hands, but the heart of it. The office floor was swept. The great oak ticket counter and the telegraph table stood clean under their dust sheets, the waybill racks in order, the freight scales oiled, the pot-bellied stove blacked and laid ready with kindling. On the telegraph table the brass key and sounder were bright, wiped free of tarnish, and there was a mug and a plate washed and set to dry, as if the man who used them meant to come back. Emmett had not given up the depot. He had been keeping it, in secret, in the dark, for years, tending the cold heart of a station that served no trains, and Iris stood in the swept and blacked, and waiting quiet of it with her dead brother-in-law's keys in her hand and felt the ground of 30 years shift under her. "What were you doing, Emmett?" she said aloud, to the cold, high room. "What were you doing back here all this time?" She went through to the agent's rooms behind the office, and they told her more, and gentler, than any word he had ever spoken to her. The rooms were spare and clean and lived in, his cot made, his few clothes on their pegs. And on the table by the window, held down against the draught by a smooth river stone, was a photograph she had never seen, Harold and Emmett as young men, in the collarless shirts of another time, standing together on this very platform with the locomotive wreathed in steam behind them, Harold laughing, and beside him a younger Emmett with one stiff hand on his brother's shoulder and on his gaunt face, caught by the camera in a way she had never once caught it in life, something that was unmistakably, achingly, love. She sat down on the edge of the made cot with the picture in her hands. He had kept it by his pillow all those years, the man who never told her he was glad she had married his brother, and she understood that whatever he had been doing in the dark of this depot, he had done it in the one place where the two brothers had ever, together, been young and glad. "You could have told me," she said to the photograph. "Whatever it was, you closed-up old fool. You could have let me help you carry it." But there was one thing in the office she had not tried. Behind the ticket counter, set into the thick inner wall, stood a great old iron freight safe, black and square and taller than she was, its door faced with a faded painted scene of a mountain and a train worn near to nothing, and it was the only thing in the whole depot that had a combination lock and a key to handle both. And Iris, who had every sensible reason to go back to town, took the photograph and put it in her coat, and lit the office lamp and went to see what her husband's brother had kept locked in the iron. None of the keys on the ring fit the safe's keyed handle, and she had no combination at all, and for a moment she nearly wept with the smallness of it, to have come all this way to a locked iron door she could not open. Then she remembered the way Emmett hid things, always in plain sight, because he trusted his own silence to keep off anyone who did not belong, and she thought of the photograph and the smooth river stone that held it down, and she lifted the stone and turned it over, and there, Scratched into the flat underside in Emmett's own small square figures, worn but plain, was a line of numbers, and beside it a small flat key taped with a strip of waxed cloth. The numbers were the combination. She dialed them by the lamp with her breath held, right and left and right, and felt the wheels drop into line, and fitted the small flat key to the handle, and turned. And the great iron door of the safe came open on its heavy hinge, and Iris raised the lamp and looked at what her brother-in-law had kept there in the dark, and did not understand, at first, what she was looking at. There was no fortune. That was her first thought, quick and ashamed. Some part of her had hoped, dialing the wheels, for banded bills, for the answer to the arithmetic that spelled fear. There was no fortune. There was paper. The great safe was lined with it, ordered and dry, shelf on shelf of station ledgers, a long tin document box, a bundle wrapped in waxed paper on the topmost shelf where the damp could never reach it, and, low in the bottom, one small heavy strongbox of dull iron. Iris lifted the first ledger into the lamplight and began, slowly, to read. They were the depot's books, station ledgers bound in cracked cloth, and when she opened the oldest the pages were filled with a cramped brown hand older than Emmett's, dated before the century turned, then a hand she did not know. And then, on to the end, Emmett's own small square writing, the same figures she had checked against her own for 20 years. It was a record of the station, every car that ever stood on the Cedar Halt spur, every waybill signed, 70 years of the mountain's freight written down, season by season. And it did not stop when the road cut the branch. She turned to the last ledger, and it ran on past the year the passenger trains ended. And the entries changed, no more cars, but instead the ground, every month for years, the state of the spur and the roof, the survey stakes the strangers left, the men who came to walk the line. The last entry was dated 11 days before he died, and it said only, Halloran's men set stakes on the spur again. They mean to have the ground and the road through it. Let them come. The deed is in the iron where it has always been, and the ground is ours in fee, not the road's, and a Merrow will be standing on it. E.M. "Oh, Emmett," Iris said. "Oh, you closed-mouthed old man, what is all this?" She opened the long tin document box. Inside, laid flat in order, were the depot's papers going back 70 years, the original railroad agreements, the survey plats of the spur, the county tax rolls copied out in a careful hand. And clipped to a plat of the spur, dated in Emmett's hand this very winter, was a tracing he had made showing the line the Aggregate Company's stakes ran, straight up the spur bed and through the notch to the foot of the ridge above the town, where a red-penciled note read, "Gravel and roadstone. They mean to strip the whole ridge and truck it down the old rail bed." Iris ran her finger up the penciled line, and a cold understanding began in her that had nothing to do with the cold of the room. Her husband's brother had not been a mad old spider keeping a dead station. He had been watching the strangers plan to lift the rails and drive a gravel road through the heart of Cedar Halt to carry off the ridge that sheltered it, and writing it all down and waiting for them to come, so a Merrow would be standing on the ground when they did. But it was the bundle in the waxed paper, on the highest shelf, that changed everything. Iris lifted it down and unwound the waxy paper on the office floor, and inside was a stiff leather folder gone dark at the corners, and inside that, the papers her brother-in-law had wrapped against fire and damp, and kept dry for longer than she had been married. The topmost was old, the paper heavy and cottony, the ink faded to sepia, and across the head of it, in an ornate clerk's hand, it read, "Deed of Grant," and below that the names of the founders and trustees of the town of Cedar Halt, and a date, 1898. Iris read it 3 times before she trusted her eyes. In the dense language of another century, it granted and conveyed to the station-keeper at Cedar Halt, to him and his heirs and assigns forever, the depot ground and the whole quarter-mile of the spur strip, in fee simple, in consideration of his keeping a public station for the town, not a right-of-way loan to the railroad, but the ground itself, deeded to the keeper and his blood, so long as a station was kept there. The railroad had never owned the ground at Cedar Halt. The town had deeded it to the station keeper, to the Merrows, who had kept it for 70 years, and the road had only ever run its rails across a strip that belonged, in fee, to the family that kept the light in the window, to the keeper of the depot, to the parcel she had bought, 6 days a widow of her own working life, for $187. To her. And clipped behind the 1898 grant, in a chain of yellowed conveyances, the title came down the years with the station, keeper to keeper, into the Merrow name, then to Emmett, and then, in the plainest and newest deed of all, dated only 2 years before, a conveyance Emmett had drawn quietly at a lawyer's in the county seat, transferring the whole of the Cedar Halt Depot and every foot of ground that ran with it to his brother's widow, Iris Merrow, to take effect on his death. He had left her a will after all. He had just left it, where only a person who cared enough to open the iron would ever find it. And clipped to the very back of the folder, the newest papers of all, was a bundle that made Iris's hands go still, tax receipts. Dozens of them. For years, quietly, Emmett Merrow, who the town thought had no money and lived on coal and lamp oil, had been paying off the back taxes on the little failing places strung along the dead spur, the homesteads and old section houses that had fallen behind when the road pulled out, buying up their liens one at a time and telling no one, not the owners, not the county, not her. "You spent everything," Iris whispered. "Every cent the road ever paid you, all those years." On this, she understood this much. Kneeling in the cold of the office, with the lamp throwing her brother-in-law's secret up the stone walls, that Emmett Merrow had not been a broken old man who let his station die and sat there going strange. He had been holding something, the oldest deed in the town, the record of a company coming to strip the ridge, the mortgages of his failing neighbors, in the dark, alone, for years. And the aggregate company wanted the spur ground very badly, and her cousin Roy was very eager to handle her paperwork, and neither of them had the faintest idea what was in the iron safe. Or perhaps one of them did. Perhaps that was the hurry. She had not opened the small heavy strongbox low in the bottom of the safe. She drew it out now into the lamplight, and the small flat key opened it too, and inside, wrapped in a rotted express company sack, was a weight of dull coin, old gold and silver, a few $100s by the heft, and pinned to the sack a faded expressway bill, 60 years old, marking it a consignment shipped up the line and never claimed, the consignee dead before it arrived. The coin left in trust with the Cedar Halt agent, because in the old days that is what a station agent was, the man the whole line trusted to hold what belonged to no one until someone rightful came for it. Emmett had held it 30 years and spent not a coin of it, though the town thought he starved. It was not his, and so not his to spend, and he had kept it the way he kept everything, in the iron, in the dark, in trust. Iris looked at the old coin a long moment and did not think, "This is my answer to the arithmetic." She thought, "This too he kept, even this." She did not sign anything. She drove back to Cedar Halt that afternoon, with the deed and the plat wrapped in her coat, and went not to the agent and not to her cousin but to the one honest lawyer in town, an old man named Alder who had drawn wills and deeds in the county for 40 years, and laid the grant on his desk and watched a lawyer's face change. "Where did you get this?" Alder said, very quietly, when he had read it through twice. "My husband's brother kept it in the depot," Iris said. "In the safe. Is it real?" Alder got up and shut his office door, which he had not troubled to do when she came in. "Mrs. Merrow," he said, "if this is what it appears to be, and I'll want to send to the county recorder to be certain the chain's unbroken, then it is worth a very great deal more than any depot. Do you understand what it means that the ground at Cedar Halt was granted in fee to the station keeper, and never to the railroad? Tell me plain, Mr. Alder. I keep a station. I don't read law." He sat back down. "It means," he said, that the railroad never owned the land its own rails run on at Cedar Halt. The founders deeded the depot ground and the spur strip to the keeper in fee simple back in '98, the strongest title there is, on the one condition that a public station be kept there. The road laid its track across your family's ground by an easement, a permission, nothing more. And an easement to run trains, he tapped the deed, his finger not quite steady, is not a right to strip the land and build a gravel road on it. When the road lifts its rails, its easement ends, and the ground reverts, clean and whole, to the fee owner. He looked up at her. To you, Mrs. Merrow, not to the county, not to the railroad to sell, and most certainly not to the Halloran Aggregate Company. The room was very quiet. Iris heard the word settle. The Aggregate Company. She said slowly. Their agent offered me $900 for the parcel. He said the company likes to hold ground along the old rail lines, that a rail bed makes a fine road. Alder's mouth went thin. I'd expect he did, he said. Mrs. Merrow, I'll tell you what half this town hasn't put together, because they don't read the county's mining filings, and I do. The Halloran Company hasn't been buying rail ground to be neighborly. They filed to quarry the ridge above Cedar Halt, roadstone and gravel, thousands of tons. And to strip a whole mountainside a company needs a way to truck it out. There is exactly one grade gentle enough to run loaded gravel trucks down out of that notch, and it is the old rail bed, straight through the spur ground and the depot yard. They mean to buy the abandoned right of way cheap from the road, lift the rails, and lay their haul road down it. And there is one thing standing in their way. He touched the old deed again, someone who owns that ground in fee and will not sell. Your brother-in-law's title is older than the railroad's rails and stronger than the company's money, and without the spur strip there is no haul road, and without a haul road, no quarry. Emmett wasn't hoarding. He was building a wall across that notch out of old paper, one deed at a time, to keep a company from carrying the ridge away in trucks. And he died before he could tell a soul. Iris sat in the old lawyer's office and felt the last piece of it lock into place, and it was not about her at all, and never had been. Roy with his bottle and his sympathy and his truck offered free for the moving. So eager to handle her paperwork, so quick to have her sign before she read a word, Roy, who ran a gravel hauling business at the edge of town. Mr. Alder, she said. My cousin Roy has a gravel and trucking business. Wanted to handle all my paperwork on the depot. Is there any way to know whether my cousin hauls for the Halloran Aggregate Company? Alder was quiet a moment. I don't know, he said. But I think, Mrs. Merrow, that you had better let me find out before you put your name on one single thing that man sets in front of you. And in the meantime, he gathered the deed and the plat carefully, reverently, into his folder. I think you had better not sell that depot to anybody, for any money, and I think you had better decide whether you mean to fight. She drove home in the early dark, the rusting rails running bright and cold beside her under the mountain, and she understood what she was going to do, though not yet how. Emmett had run out of time. Now it was hers, and she would not sell it, and she would not sign it away, and above all she would do the one thing the whole title quietly turned upon. Because a station deeded in fee, Alder had told her, held on the one condition that a station be kept, a public way house, open to the town. 2 years the depot had stood dark and boarded. 2 years no one had kept the light. She was going to open the depot again. Because the deed held so long as a station was kept there, and because somewhere ahead, in a spring that had not come yet, the company was going to come up the grade to lift the rails and take the ground, and Iris meant to be standing on the platform of an open, lighted, lawfully kept station, with the oldest paper in the county in her hand when it did. The town, when it heard what the Merrow woman intended, did exactly what her brother-in-law had spent his silent years learning it would do. It laughed. Not unkindly, Cedar Halt was not a cruel town, but Thoroughly, over coffee and across counters, the soft, sad laughter of practical people at a foolish woman's folly. Iris Merrow, who could not keep her own job when the road pulled out, was going to open a station on a branch the railroad had abandoned, 61 years old, and keep a lamp burning for passengers who would never come. She had taken her losses hard, they said. Small wonder, first Harold. Then the road. Then poor strange Emmett, and now she'd got some notion about that ruin at the end of the spur, and the kindest thing was to let it run its course until the cold and the loneliness brought her back to her senses and the aggregate company's $900. The laughter had a place, and the place was the mercantile, where the men gathered by the stove in the mornings, and Iris walked into the middle of it one bitter January day. Come in for the things she needed to make the depot fit to open: lamp oil, roofing felt, stovepipe, hardware for the doors and the broken windows. The talk stopped when the bell rang, the way talk stops when its subject walks in. Then started again, lower, and she heard the word depot and a low chuckle, and she read her list out plainly at the counter, and the storekeeper filled it without quite meeting her eye, because he was ashamed and did not know how to say so. It was one of the men by the stove who spoke, a man she knew a little named Del Rufus, who said it to the room more than to her. "Fixing up the old depot, Iris? What's a body want with stovepipe and roofing felt for a station with no trains?" And when she did not answer at once, he pressed it, gently, the way a man presses a thing he is sure of. "You're not truly going to try and open old Cedar Halt? Tell me you're not. The road's abandoned the branch. The rails come up in the spring. You're going to keep a waiting room warm for a train that's never coming, at 61, on $187? The room laughed, softly, and waited for her to be embarrassed. Iris took her change and put it in her coat, and then she turned and looked at Del Rufus, and she was not embarrassed, and that was the thing that changed the sound in the room. "Mr. Rufus," she said, "you know that ridge above the notch, the one that keeps the north wind off this whole town. Have you heard what the Halloran Company means to do with it?" The man blinked, thrown. "Quarry it," Iris said, "into the quiet store. Strip it for roadstone and gravel, thousands of tons, and truck it out. And do you know where they mean to run their gravel road? Straight through the depot yard in the middle of Cedar Halt on the old rail bed, 100 gravel trucks a day, past your door. And the ridge that shelters this town hauled away load by load." She let it sit a moment. "There's one thing standing in their way. The depot ground was deeded in fee in 1898 to the station keeper and his heirs, not to the railroad. My husband's people. Me, when the rails come up, the ground is ours, and there's no haul road and no quarry without it." Emmett knew. He tried to make this town understand for years, and it laughed at him the way you're laughing at me. I'm done being laughed out of a thing that's true. Good day. She walked out with the bell jangling behind her, and her ears did burn, because she had never in her life said so much at once to a room full of men. But behind her the mercantile was quiet, and Del Rufus was not laughing. And as she loaded the truck, an older man she half knew came out after her, turning his cap in his hands, and asked, awkwardly, whether it was true about the deed, and whether that old paper of Emmett's might reach far enough to keep the ridge where it stood. It was the first time anyone in Cedar Halt had asked her a real question instead of giving her advice, and it had come, she noticed. The moment she stopped asking to be believed and simply told them the truth and let them keep it or not. Roy did not laugh. Roy came out to the depot, where Iris had moved her one suitcase into the agent's rooms and begun her work, and this time there was less of the sympathy about him and more of something harder underneath. "You've been to Alder," he said in the doorway. He did not sit. "You found the old man's papers." "I found my husband's brother's papers," Iris said, "in my husband's brother's depot." "Yes, Iris," he spread his big hands, reasonable, warm, and only a little too fast. "Whatever that old lawyer told you those papers are worth, Alder's behind the times. That grant won't hold up. The roads run trains over that ground for 70 years. That's their right of way. Any company lawyer will run circles around a scrap of town paper from '98. You'll spend money you don't have on a fight you'll lose, and lose the $900 besides. Let me take it off your hands, cuz I'll better their offer. $1,400. Cash out of my own pocket. This week. Take it, and go be comfortable, and let an old crazy man's fight die with him where it belongs. And there it was. $1,400 from Roy's own pocket, this week, cash, for a 70-year-old scrap of paper he had just finished telling her was worthless. Iris looked at her cousin filling the low doorway of the depot his uncle by marriage had died keeping secret, and she was not quite angry. She was something colder and clearer than angry. Emmett knew, she said. That's it, isn't it, Roy? He knew what the Halloran Company was, and he knew what you were, and he spent every dollar he had buying up this ground one lien at a time, so that when the gravel men came, there'd be a Merrow holding the oldest paper in Cedar Halt to stand across the notch. He couldn't make the town listen. So he made sure the town couldn't sell what it didn't understand it had. And you've been hauling for that company, haven't you? Waiting for the strange old man to die so you could get the depot away from me before I ever opened the iron and found out what I was sitting on. Roy's big face closed like a door. You're a laid-off widow alone on a ruin, he said, and all the warmth was gone out of it now. You've got no money and no work and no man to stand up for you. You can't fight the company, and you can't fight the county, and you can't fight me. Be smart, Iris. Take the $1,400 while it's on the table. Get out of my husband's brother's depot, she said. He went, and Iris shut the great door behind him, and stood in the cold and the dust with her heart going hard, and knew she had just turned down 7 times the money in her whole possession from her own bloodkin, and that she was, by every practical measure Cedar Halt lived by, a fool. Then she took the oldest station ledger from the safe, lit the lamp, and began to learn how to make a dead depot live. It was not simple, and no one helped her at first. The roof leaked along one whole slope, the platform was heaved and split, the freight doors hung off their rollers, and the great waiting room was so cold her breath hung in it. But Emmett, Iris came to see as she read his ledgers by lamplight through those first hard weeks, had understood the depot's salvation and left the way of it written down. She could not make it a railroad again, the trains were gone for good, but a station was a station because a keeper kept it open and warm and public, and that needed nothing the mountain and a pair of hands could not supply. The stove was sound. The walls were stone and would stand another 100 years. What had failed was the roof and the doors and the will to open them, and all of that a patient person could mend, because it was made of wood and felt and tin and stubbornness and not of money, and no man could tell her she might not repair what was already hers. So Iris mended it. She could not reshingle the whole roof alone before the spring, but she read in the old ledgers how the depot had been patched through 70 years of hard winters, and climbed up in the still cold days and nailed roofing, felt over the worst of the broken slope, her fingers stiff and bleeding a little into the frost, until the waiting room stopped taking snow. She set the freight doors back on their rollers, glazed the broken windows one pane at a time, and blacked the great stove and lit it, and the first evening the waiting room came warm around her she sat in it alone, with a lamp in the window and the wind off the ridge, finding no way in, and felt the depot wake the way a cold house wakes when a fire is finally lit in it. Day by day the station came back. She swept the platform and salted the ice, and hung a board by the door in her own square hand, Cedar Halt Depot, waiting room open, and one gray morning in February she unlocked the office door at first light and left it unlocked, and lit the lamp, and for the first time in years the Cedar Halt Depot was an open, lighted, lawfully kept station, exactly as the 1898 deed required, whether a single train ever came or not. It came open, and an odd thing happened, slowly, through February and into March, as the word went round that the depot was lit and warm again, and the widow Merrow kept it open every day, the old people began to come. Not the men with an eye on the company's money, but the old ones, the ones who still remembered when 3 trains a day stopped at Cedar Halt, and the whole town lived by the whistle, the ones whose fathers had shipped their wool and their apples off that platform. They came up the spur road by 1s and 2s, cap in hand, and stood in the warm waiting room and said awkward, halting things. My father shipped 40 years of apples off this platform, an old man named Dawes told her, turning his cap in his hands. He had been a section foreman on the branch before the road cut it. Every fall, when Emmett let it go dark, folks said the day of Cedar Halt was done. He looked at the lit lamp and the warm stove, and something worked in his weathered face. There's talk in the county, Miss Iris. They say Halloran means to quarry the ridge and run the gravel down the old bed. A man who hauls survey chain for them has seen the maps. Is it true what you told Del Rufus? About the old deed? About the ground being the depots and not the roads? It's true, Mr. Dawes, Iris said. The grant's dated 1898. It deeds this ground in fee to whoever keeps the station, older than the rails, older than the company by 50 years. When the road lifts its track its right ends, and the ground reverts to me, whole and clear, and there's no gravel road and no quarry without the ground it has to cross. I don't need a single train to keep the deed alive, only to keep the station open, and I mean to. She watched the old man's mouth fall open. My husband's brother left me everything he knew, and I mean to keep the door open. After that they helped her. Dawes and 2 other old railroad men brought ladders and cedar shakes up the spur and began, on the still days, to shingle the roof she could not finish alone. A retired roadmaster named Ott, who had run the whole Kettleback Northern in its last good years and knew every deed and easement the road had ever held, went through Emmett's tin box with her and showed her which papers were the roads and which were the towns, and taught her the words she would need. Fee simple, easement, reversion, abandonment, the way Alder had begun to teach her the law of it. The old railroad families, and the little holders along the spur whose liens Emmett had quietly bought and meant them to have back, formed themselves without ever quite saying so into the friends of a depot the county still called condemned. And Iris, who 2 months before had been a laid-off agent alone with a suitcase, found she was a station keeper again, and the reason a mountain town full of frightened people had remembered they were not helpless. And then, in the last week of April 1969, the spring Emmett had written into his ledger came for the town in earnest, and the aggregate company and the railroad came up the grade to take the ground. It happened the way Ott had said it would. The railroad sent a rail lifting crew to pull up the abandoned track and salvage the steel, and behind them came the Halloran Company's men with their transit and their stakes and a bulldozer on a lowboy, to grade the old bed into a gravel haul road the moment the rails were up, and a company lawyer with the road's bill of sale for the right-of-way, bought cheap from a railroad glad to be rid of a dead branch, the whole thing lawful, looking as a Sunday. On a raw, bright April morning the rail crew reached the head of the spur and made to come down it toward the depot, and the company's dozer came grinding up the grade behind, and the town of Cedar Halt woke to the sound of a mountain being made ready to be carried away. But the ground they had bought was not the roads to sell. Iris was in the depot when Ott the old roadmaster brought her the word, red-faced and out of breath from the climb. "They've come," he said. The road's crews pulling steel at the head of the spur, and Halloran's dozers right behind them fixing to grade the bed. "Miss Iris, if that old deed is ever going to be worth anything, it's worth it today, or it's worth nothing ever." He gripped his cap. Alder's gone for the county surveyor and the recorder's map. "But it's your ground. It has to be you that stands on it." Iris took Emmett's ledger of the survey stakes, and the plat of the spur with the company's own line traced on it, and the 1898 deed in its waxed paper, and made sure the lamp was lit in the depot window and the office door stood open and the board hung plain by it. Cedar Halt Depot, waiting room open so any man could see a station lawfully kept, and then walked up the spur to where the rail crew was lifting the last of the steel and the dozer stood idling at the head of her ground, and found the county surveyor already there, a spare, tired official named Kessler, whose thankless job it was to say where one man's ground ended and another's began, and the agent Calloway and a company lawyer in a city suit. Mrs. Merrow, Calloway said, and the sorrow was all gone out of him now, and something tighter had come into his smooth face at the sight of her. This is a lawful purchase. The company holds the railroad's grant to the right-of-way, filed and in order. There's nothing for you here. Mr. Kessler, Iris said, past him to the surveyor, and she did not raise her voice, because she had Alder's coaching and the deed in her hand and knew, to the letter, where the line ran. My name is Iris Merrow. I own the Cedar Halt Depot, and the ground it stands on, and the whole of the spur strip these men are standing on. I've come to show you the title. She held out the waxed paper bundle. This is a deed of grant, from the founders of Cedar Halt to the keeper of this depot and his heirs forever, in fee simple, dated 1898 and recorded the same year. The railroad never owned this ground. It ran its rails across it by an easement, no more, and an easement to run trains ends when the rails come up, which is what this crew is doing right now, before your eyes. The moment that rail is up, this ground reverts to me, whole and clear, in fee. She let it settle in the raw air. It is older than the rails, and older than the company by 50 years. And no man builds a road across it, or takes a stone off that ridge over it, without me. By the deed in your hand, my ground begins where these men are standing. The surveyor took the deed in his cold, reddened hands and read it again, and Iris watched a weary official come slowly, disbelievingly awake. He looked at the date. He looked at the company's lawyer. He unrolled his own copy of the recorder's plat against the hood of his truck and laid the old grant's calls beside it, and did the arithmetic of a boundary a lifetime of the work had made automatic in him, the same way Iris did the arithmetic of a ledger, and there was no other answer in it, and he knew it. This is genuine? Kessler said. This is recorded? 1898? In fee? It's recorded, Iris said. Mr. Alders confirmed the chain with the recorder, keeper to keeper, unbroken, down to me. It's on file. It's real. And that depot has stood open and lawfully kept these 2 months, with the lamp lit and the door unlocked, in front of the whole town, so no man can tell you the station was abandoned or the condition of the grant broken. The deed holds. And the ground under these men's feet is mine. The company's lawyer began, then, the argument she had known was coming. The one Roy had thrown at her in the doorway, that the railroad's long use had ripened into ownership, that a scrap of town paper from 988 could not stand against 70 years of the road running trains, that the old grant had lapsed and the road's live sale stood ahead of it, and it frightened Iris, because it turned Emmett's long silent keeping into the weapon against him. But she had Alder come up the grade behind her, dusty and grim and holding the recorder's certified map, and Alder had the answer, and the answer was the deed and the keeping both. The road held an easement, not a fee, Alder said, laying the certified plat on the surveyor's truck beside the old grant, and long use of an easement does not ripen into ownership of the land, not against a recorded fee title, and the burden is on the party claiming otherwise. The grant of 1898 is recorded, the chain unbroken into Mrs. Merrow's hands, and its one condition, that a public station be kept, has been met without a break. Her brother-in-law kept this depot every year of the 20 the town thought it dark, and my client has kept it open, warm, and lit. These 2 months before the whole town's eyes. He turned to the company's man. You bought an easement the road no longer holds, over ground the road never owned. The moment that crew lifts the last of the steel, your seller's right is spent and the fee stands clear in Mrs. Merrow, there was a right kept alive in the dark, by a man who knew this day was coming, and taken up in the open by the woman he left it to. The 1898 fee holds, and it stands across every foot of ground your road has to cross. The raw grade was very quiet, and old Dawes, who had come up the spur behind Alder with a dozen of the old railroad men and the little holders off the dead line, stepped forward with his cap in his hands. I'll swear to it. So'll every man here. Emmett Merrow kept that station and that ground in his own way every year of them 20, and we let the town call him crazy for it, and we were wrong. You want to say nobody kept the Cedar Halt station alive? You say it to us. A low sound of agreement went round the men, and the surveyor looked at the deed and the certified plat and the ridge above the town and asked the company's lawyer, very quietly, for the calls in his bill of sale. It was not the law, in the end, that broke it, though the law was on her side. It was the plain fact of the line. Kessler had spent his life running boundaries by the arithmetic of what the record said, and the arithmetic was not close. He confirmed the Merrow fee on the spot, pending the court's formal word, and told the rail crew they might finish lifting the road's own steel, but the company's men could not set a blade to ground that was not theirs. Which meant, because the haul road could not cross the depot yard without Iris's leave, and she would not give it, that the gravel road had nowhere to run, and a quarry with no way to truck its stone down out of the notch is no quarry at all. By that evening the dozer was back on its lowboy and gone down the valley, and the ridge above Cedar Halt stood where it had stood since before the town, and the old rail bed lay quiet in the spring grass, the ground at last plainly and lawfully the town's own again, through the keeper who held the oldest paper on it. After that, the fight went out of the other side all at once, the way a fire goes out when the wind that fed it turns. It is one thing for a company to argue a strange old man off a dead depot. It is another thing entirely to argue, in front of a whole mountain town, that the oldest deed in the county should be set aside so a company could carry off the ridge that sheltered it and run 100 gravel trucks a day through the middle of Cedar Halt. The company withdrew its claim to the right-of-way, and the county recorder and the district court confirmed, in a decree Alder read aloud at the courthouse that summer, that the 1898 grant to the keeper of the Cedar Halt Depot was genuine, recorded, and, in good standing, a fee-simple title to the depot ground and the spur strip, held lawfully and clearly by Iris Merrow. Which meant the great land grab was dead. A gravel company cannot quarry a ridge it has no road to haul the stone down from, when the one grade out belongs in fee to a woman who will not sell it for any money, and Iris would not. The Halloran Aggregate Company took its transit and its dozer to a ridge with an easier grade and no old paper in its way, and Roy Tolliver, whose gravel firm had indeed, as Alder's inquiries established, held a fat contract to haul the company's stone down out of the notch, a contract now worth nothing, left Cedar Halt not long after and did not come back, and if Iris grieved that, she grieved it quietly, and never once spoke his name in the town. Harlan Prentice, the division man, came up the grade that summer, after the ridge was safe, and stood on the mended platform with his good hat in his hands, and did not quite know how to say the thing he had come to say. I walked you out of this station with an envelope and a handshake. Mrs. Merrow, he managed at last. Told you the branch didn't pay and we didn't need an agent here anymore. He looked at the lit lamp, the warm waiting room, the swept and open platform. I've thought about that since the company near took the ridge. If I'd had my way, you'd have taken the 900 and been gone, and this depot would be a gravel company's scale house, and that mountain in 1,000 trucks instead of standing over the town. He turned the hat. I came to say I'm sorry, to your face. You were doing what the road wanted, Miss Prentice, Iris said, and you did give me an envelope, which is more than the depot ever will. She did not say the thing she might have said, which was that the sensible, unanimous advice of the whole town had very nearly let a mountain be carried off in trucks. She had learned, from a dead man's ledgers, that being right is not the same as needing to be told you were right, and that the only use of the ground was to keep it whole and open, not to hold it over anyone. "Come in out of the wind," she said instead. "The stove's lit. I'll give you a cup of coffee, and you can tell me whether the road would ever lease this town a track again if the ridge that isn't a quarry grows something worth shipping. Because I mean to see Cedar Halt live off more than the memory of trains." She did not gloat. She had been walked out of her life's work with a handshake, pitied at the mercantile, and pressed by her own blood to sign away the one thing Emmett had died to keep. And when the whole of it turned and ran the other way, she took no pleasure in the turning. She did not remind the roadmen how glad they had been to be rid of her, nor the town how it had laughed. When the Aggregate Company's own lawyers, red-faced, came at last to ask whether she would sell them even a narrow lease across the spur ground for their road, she heard them out courteously, and said no, gently, and kept the ground whole and in the town where it belonged. And she did with Emmett's spur the thing she understood, now he had always meant to do. She held the liens he had bought up on the little failing places along the dead line, and one by one, as she was able, she cleared them or handed them back, not for a profit she needed, but to the families who worked the land at the price Emmett had paid the taxes for, so that the ground the company had meant to swallow belonged, at the end, to the people of Cedar Halt. And the old express coin she had found, held 60 years in trust, she would not spend either. She gave it, with the way bill and the whole account of it, into the county's keeping to be held rightfully as Emmett had held it, because a thing left in trust is not a windfall. She kept the waiting room warm and the lamp lit through that winter and every winter after, for the drummers and drifters and stranded travelers who came in off the last through train or the hard mountain road with no place to go, and gave them the bench by the stove and a hot cup and asked them nothing. The way she found written in the oldest ledgers. The first keepers of Cedar Halt had done for wayfarers long before her. The dying town did not die. It came back, slowly, the way the depot had come back, one mended thing at a time, and above it the ridge stood whole against the north wind, kept by a woman with the oldest paper in the county, and the lamp in the depot window burned every night for whoever came up the grade in the dark. Iris Merrow kept the depot for the rest of her life. She never got her place back on the railroad, and found she did not much want it. She had a station on a mountain and a lamp to light, and a reason, every evening, to set it in the window. She was not rich in the way the town measured riches, though never again poor in the way that had spelled fear at her rented table, for a town whose shelter she had saved does not forget. But that was not why she kept the light. She kept it for the same reason Emmett had blacked the stove and oiled the key of a station with no trains, because the ground belonged to everyone who came after, and the difference between a town that stood and a town carried off in trucks was one old deed, kept alive, and one door kept open, by a person who had decided that keeping it was worth whatever it cost. She never emptied the iron safe. She left the ledgers and the deed behind its great door where Emmett had kept them, and added to them her own station ledger now, in her own square hand under his, the travelers she took in and the work she did on the roof and the state of the spur, year after year. The record going on unbroken as it had for 70 years. And she understood, keeping it, the whole of what her husband's brother had been trying to tell her in the only language he had, which was not words but keeping, that the money had never been the point. That what a person leaves is not what they hoard, but what they keep alive and open for the ones who come after. They found her, years on, an old woman by then, in the keeper's chair by the safe with the station ledger open in her lap and the lamp still burning in the window, gone quietly the way Emmett had gone, with her work done and the door open. And the town of Cedar Halt, which had once laughed, did not laugh. The people came up the spur road in the gray dawn, and stood bareheaded on the mended platform, and one of them went in and lit the lamp she kept against the last of the dark. And then they went home. And that night some hand, that was not hers, blacked the stove and set the lamp in the depot window and kept the door open onto the mountain, and some hand has kept it open ever since. Because that was the thing Iris Merrow finally understood, kneeling long ago in the cold of the office over her brother-in-law's waxed paper bundle, that a mountain and a light in a window and the oldest deed to a piece of ground are not possessions. They are a promise. It is the promise a person makes in the dark, at their own cost, to a stranger they will never meet, coming up a hard road out of the cold with nothing left but the hope that someone ahead kept a door open for them. Emmett had made that promise, and kept it in silence until it took his whole strange life, and Iris had found it behind the iron, and taken it up and kept it in the open until it saved them all. And the promise did not end with either of them. It was never meant to. Keep the door open, keep the stove lit, and a lamp in the window for the one who comes up out of the dark with nothing. The station is still open. Somebody made sure of it. Somebody always has.